distributed computing, it's multiple computers that are connected together within a distributed network. You know. Then we also talked about how both parallel computing and distributed computing, how they try to execute a job. They get it done by breaking a big data job or big task into smaller units. After breaking down into smaller units, then they survey, they look out for all the computing resources that are available in order to be able to execute the different units of job that are available. And then the task is assigned to all those resources, and then the job is done. We also spoke last week about the problem of latency. I think this was where we ended last week. Latency, it's like the delays, all the aggregate delays that are encountered within the computing environment, within a distributed computing environment or parallel computing environment. So when you have delays from each unit of those computers that are connected within the network, when you aggregate all of it together, that can be said to be latency. And a way of solving that is now by bringing the concept of parallel computing and distributed computing together. So parallel computing are standalone computers with multiple processors. Distributed computing are a connection of individual computers within a particular network. So when we take standalone computers with multiple processing units and connect them within a distributed system, we believe that with that, we can, at least to some extent, solve the latency. We can significantly reduce the latency problem. That was where we ended last week. Then yesterday we talked about some of the techniques of parallel computing, like cluster or grid is a concept of parallel computing. We talk about parallel processing units. We also talk about high performance computing. High performance computing, it's like in-memory computing, so in terms of in-memory computing, I said yesterday that the processor is an independent component from the memory. But if we decide to etch the memory on the processor, we can reduce the time, the back and forth. We can reduce the back and forth between the processor, within the processor and the memory. That leads to what is called a high performance computing, because the performance of those type of computer, it's significantly very, very high compared to traditional computing technology. Then you also have like a cluster or a grid computing system. It's when you have parallel computers connected together within a network so that they can share the workload among themselves. Then also yesterday, we talked about virtualization, and the easiest way I could relate to virtualization to you is if you have worked with TeamViewer before. So for those who have done TeamViewer before, TeamViewer, it's a virtualization application that you can install on your desktop. And when you install it on your desktop, somebody in a remote connection can connect to that PC and be working on that PC as if he's just right there by the computer, but it's not there, or it's not there on the PC. You can also have multiple sessions of TeamViewer on your computer, and multiple people are doing different things on that computer at the same time. It's a concept of virtualization. One thing that virtualization does is that it separates the physical layer from it virtualizes the it separates. Let me not use virtualization to explain virtual. Let me not use virtual to explain virtualization. It separates, the physical resources from the applications that are on that PC, and that can help you to scale your computer to a very large extent. So virtualization provides a higher level of efficiency. It's not the real computer that is there, but you can take your physical computer now and divide your computer that you are attending this class with. You can take that computer and divide it into like 4 different computers, and 4 different people are going to log into it, and they're going to be doing jobs on that computer separately. as if the computer is theirs, but really in the real sense, it's not their computer. Another tool that facilitates virtualization is what they call remote desktop. For those people who have attempted remote desktop before, if you've attempted remote desktop before, remote desktop is also a virtualization tool that comes with our personal computer. So you can buy a server and partition that server into a number of units, and then you have different applications, different operating system running on it as if it's like an independent computer. So we talked about virtualization yesterday. Then yesterday we introduced the concept of Hadoop. So in order to be able to solve the problem of big data, we said earlier on, there was in the evolution of big data, how it has evolved, there was a problem of velocity. The rate at which the data was changing was very fast. So they developed databases and relationships. Then at some point, there were varieties of data, like email data, picture data, video data, and it now became a problem on how are they going to now store this type of data. Then they brought about the concept of NoSQL. Now, the problem now is that there is so much proliferation of data and the volume becomes so much. And because the volume becomes so much, there is need for a lot of computation power in order to be able to manage such volume of data. And that led to the development of Hadoop technology. Hadoop is open source platform, originally developed by the guys in Yahoo, the Yahoo guys. Then at some point, the guys in Google also adopted it. Then at some point, they now decided to release it under an open source license into the market. With Hadoop, you can actually handle or you can analyze big data that traditionally would have been much more difficult to analyze, especially unstructured data. Hadoop is not a software. Hadoop is a framework. Hadoop is more of a concept than just a software. It's not just a piece of software. But today we are going to be talking a lot more about the Hadoop framework. So Hadoop can work on a number of machines, and it does not need to share. And this machine don't need to share the same memory space, or they don't need to share the same disk space. So you can have your data in Lagos, for instance. You can have your data in Lagos, and the system that is analyzing that data in Lagos can be maybe in Abuja. That is one thing that Hadoop brought into computing. So with that, storage improves, and with the way that Hadoop stores data, it tries to eliminate a single source of failure. Today we'll be spending a lot more time to talk about Hadoop. That is the topic for today. Finally for Hadoop, we said that there are three components of Hadoop. You have the HDFS, you have the MapReduce, and you also have the YARN component. We also spoke about cloud computing. Cloud computing is a method that provides for sharing computing resources, like on the internet, resources, application software, networking, and it could be in form of a software or infrastructure or a platform, depending on the case may be. Cloud computing facilitates, or cloud computing allows for scalability. It allows for pooling of resources. So different organizations can pool resources together, and have access to a cloud infrastructure, and they can service themselves in a way that is transparent to every other person and independent of every other person or every other user that is connected to that platform. It's low cost. Until recently, we've always thought that it is fault tolerant. Until recently, when AWS was down. AWS was down for a very long time, and a lot of people could no longer access their data. People that had their doorbell or that had the gate to their house connected to AWS server, they could not access their home just because AWS was down temporarily for some time. Then the cloud cloud is yesterday, it could be public computing, public cloud, it could be private cloud. When it is public cloud, example of public cloud, and there's Google Cloud, there's Microsoft Cloud, there's which other one? Google, yeah, there's AWS. The Huawei too now has a public cloud. Then there are private clouds. You have a lot of financial institutions that decide to set up their own private cloud, and within it, all the employees and users within their the cloud infrastructure. So finally, yesterday we also spent time to talk about okay, not necessarily yesterday, but I think we also had in-memory computing that we touched on a little bit. And in-memory computing has to do with like building the memory on the processor in a way that it speed up the processing of the processing of data, or the analysis of that it speeds it up significantly. It's always it's a lot faster, it's significantly faster, and speed it's a big deal when it comes to big data processing. Speed is a big deal. So that's like a recap of those things that we did just last week and yesterday. So today we'll be narrowing down specifically on Hadoop ecosystem. And the objective for today is to look at the various components of Hadoop. I said it's an ecosystem. It's not just a single piece of software. So one person cannot just say he's a master of Hadoop. You know, framework, the Hadoop file system. We'll start by discussing Hadoop file system, then we'll narrow down to the MapReduce component and the Yarn component. We'll explain the difference between both of them. Then we'll also be talking about HBase, we'll be talking about Hive, we'll be talking about Zookeeper. The other components of Hadoop we'll be talking about them. So how do you look at Microsoft Office? Microsoft Office is an ecosystem. Come now and say that that I'm a Microsoft. Yeah, you can be a Microsoft. So if somebody says that he's a Microsoft Office expert, that means he knows every component of Microsoft Office, including, let me check my computer here. Microsoft Office. If you are looking for Microsoft Office, I want to check the components of Microsoft Office. Microsoft Office has a lot of components in it. Microsoft Office has Microsoft Word. Microsoft Office has Microsoft Excel. Microsoft Office has Microsoft Access. It has InfoPath Designer. It has Microsoft Visual. It has PowerPoint. It has Microsoft Publisher. And all of these are different. They are different components of Microsoft Office. So when you think about Hadoop ecosystem, think about it the way you think about Microsoft Office. So you can see somebody that is very good at Microsoft Word. That person can type anything. But when you ask the person to do presentation with PowerPoint, the person will say, sorry, I don't know how to use PowerPoint. You can see someone who knows how to use PowerPoint very well, and you ask the person, okay, can you analyze this data for me on Excel? The person may not be able to get it done on Excel. And why is that? It's just because Microsoft Office is a framework. It's an ecosystem of a lot of different softwares put together. So you can be an expert in all areas of it. So the same way, Hadoop ecosystem comprises many different components of Hadoop ecosystem, as we discussed yesterday. What are the core components of Hadoop ecosystem? Hello, Titi. Can you hear me? Are you on the call?
Okay. Hello, sir. Your voice is breaking.
My voice is breaking.
Yes, it just goes off and then after a while it comes on again.
Okay, but is this still breaking now or it's better now?
I think it's better now.
Did you hear the question?
No, I didn't hear the question. That's why I'm asking.
Okay, so I was asking Titi the core component of the Hadoop ecosystem.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, hi. Hi, Blessing.
Hi. Yeah, so I want to see if you're in the class with me.
I guess we mentioned 3 yesterday.
Yes, what are they?
The HDFS, the YAN,
2.
and I can't remember the first one.
It's on the screen.
MapReduce.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so as I was saying, recap. So when you think about Hadoop ecosystem, think about a suite of software, the same way you have Microsoft Office. In Microsoft Office, you have Microsoft Excel, Microsoft PowerPoint, you have Microsoft Word. You might have an expert in Microsoft Word who does not know how to use Microsoft PowerPoint. You can have an expert in Microsoft PowerPoint who does not know how to use Microsoft Access, you know. So the same way in Hadoop ecosystem, it's a combination of elements put together. But the core of those elements, the core of Hadoop ecosystem are the elements that Titi just mentioned to us. That is the HDFS, which the MapReduce algorithm, and the YAN component. Hadoop was developed in order to be able to help companies to manage huge volume of data that they generate. I know a few companies in Lagos that have implemented Hadoop ecosystem. They are not very much, but just a few of them. One of them is MTN Nigeria. MTN Nigeria has implemented Hadoop ecosystem. They did that implementation 2018, 2019. Airtel Nigeria is currently in the process of that implementation. EcoBank has implemented it. I think Nine Mobile also implemented one aspect of their solution is running one aspect, not the entire aspect of their solution is running on is running on Hadoop ecosystem. I think all the telcos, including Glo too. I was part of the bidding process for the Glo Hadoop ecosystem. So Glo too runs on Hadoop. In banks, I think the opportunity is still very huge in the bank. It's probably 1 or 2 that is currently running on Hadoop ecosystem. So the opportunity, the market is very, very green for this concept. So the HDFS is a file system. The HDFS is a file system, which is like the location where the file is stored. MapReduce, it does what is called divide and conquer. I'm going to explain that later on. Yes, and then the YAN component is like a piece of software that coordinates the availability, the allocation of resources within the Hadoop ecosystem. It's a tool. It's a tool of, or it's a set of tools. The ecosystem is a set of tools. So beyond the core component, let's look at other components of Hadoop ecosystem. So this particular chart is showing the top 3 are the core components. But beyond that, you have HBase, you have Hive, you have Pig, you have Scoop, you have Zookeeper, you have Flume, you have Ozy. And so for those that are coming in contact with this particular concept for the very first time, please, I don't want you to be a big deal. It's not a big deal. And the easiest way you can know that it's not a big deal is to see how Microsoft Office works. Because a lot of you have interacted with Microsoft Office, I think nothing will scare you about Microsoft Office today. Even if you don't know how to use maybe PowerPoint, for instance, if you don't know how to fit on your computer almost every time would make you feel comfortable with PowerPoint. You know, if you don't know how to use Microsoft Access, the fact that it's installed on your computer after all, it's on your computer, so it does not bite. So what
Hello,
you
sir.
do
Your
is
voice is
that
breaking again.
my voice is still breaking.
Yes.
Wow, what could be wrong? Okay, so how does it feel now? Does it sound better?
It's not like it does that every time. At times it just goes off, and some things you are saying I don't get to hear it. I try to pick it up from where it starts talking again.
Okay, okay. So that is noted. I think I'll just keep my mouth to the microphone and make sure that my mouth is not moving too far away from the microphone.
Okay,
Thanks a lot
thank you.
for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
but please, anytime you feel like it's also drifting away again, please call my attention to it so that I don't get so I don't go too far before you. I don't get to talk too long before you now call my attention to it. Okay, so as I was saying, the Hadoop ecosystem comprises of many different components. The core of them are HDFS, MapReduce, and Yarn. But beyond that, there are other components like Scoop and Zookeeper. And the best way to understand what they do is to know what problem that each of these components is trying to solve. So each of these components, they try to solve a particular kind of problem to solve, then you will know exactly what they do. So HBase is like a storage for unstructured data. It's like a storage for unstructured data. Hive is like a storage for structured data. Scoop is like a data migration tool. Like if you want to move data from one point to the other, Scoop is, then you have Zookeeper, you have Flume. All of them, they have a particular problem that they try to solve. So when you are working on a project and you want to probably migrate data from maybe an Oracle database or from SQL Server database or even from Excel file, you want to migrate it into a Hadoop ecosystem, into a Hadoop framework. You just know that Scoop is the go-to guy. If the type of data that you want to move into that Hadoop framework, it's structured data, then you know that Hive is the go-to guy. If it's unstructured data, you know that HBase could be the go-to application. So depending on the problem you're trying to solve will determine the piece of software that you need to get it done. And each of these, they have different commands. So so we say Hadoop is open source, which means that you can go to the internet and download Hadoop on your computer. But you can. But some companies have actually designed commercial version. They are now commercial distributions of that Hadoop framework. So Cloudera has a commercial distribution. Hortonworks is the most popular. I think it has about 75% of the market share. Intel has its own Hadoop framework. AWS, of course. AWS has its own that is in the cloud. There is MapOut, there is Greenplum. All of these are different distributions of Hadoop ecosystem. And because it's open source, all they just do is that they take that open source technology, they redesign it in a little bit, but to still have the core component, they design it a little bit, and then they now sell it. Yeah, they now sell it to people that would want to buy those adaptations that they have introduced into the framework. So here you have the vendors. The vendors for those commercial distribution, you have them in this part of my chart. Then you have the other component, the related component of the Hadoop framework: Flume, Scoop, OZ, Avro, HBase, Hive, Peak. You have all of that here. You have the core component of Hadoop, which is MapReduce, HDFS, Yarn. And then there are related technologies that look like Hadoop, but they are not necessarily Hadoop. You have Twitter Storm, you have HPPC, you have Drem. It's good to know the difference between all of that. So first of all, introduction. So let's start with the introduction to HDFS. HDFS is one of the core components of the Hadoop ecosystem. Next week, we are going to be having practical sessions on this. We'll be having practical session on this. We'll be practicalizing how to move data from a traditional computing environment to HDFS. About how to shut down HDFS node. We'll be practicalizing all of that next week. So please, I wish that everybody who has registered gets the virtual learning environment installed on their PC, because with the virtual learning environment, it will make it easy to be able to practicalize these things in the class. We've talked so many theories, so let's even see how it all works. More on the workbook. Yeah, we're focusing more on the workbook. That is the third textbook in that training kit that you have. So I'll pause a bit. If you have any question, please feel free to ask me any question before I proceed. Any question, please?
Okay, I wanted to just ask, to what extent are we supposed to understand this Hadoop? Because you rightly used the concept of the Microsoft Office, and you mentioned knowing some parts and not knowing some parts, considering the fact that this has to do with big data, and for you to be operational and at least very good at what you're doing, to what extent are you supposed to no, because it's as though the Hadoop is quite a lot in terms of components and its commands.
Are you still there? Your voice is gone.
Did you hear? Did you hear what I said?
I couldn't hear you for some time.
Oh, can you hear me now, sir?
Yes, I can. Please call me Blessing, not sir.
I told you I will learn it. So as I was saying, sir. Oh, okay, Mr. Blessing. I was saying that to what extent is one supposed to gain expertise in the Hadoop operation or usage? Because you rightly use the Microsoft Office as an example that one may know an area and not know the other area, but considering the fact that this is big data, and you would, for somebody to be efficient and effective in the work, you need to know it to a certain extent. So and also considering the fact that there are quite a number of components. So I'm just wondering, to what extent, or in terms of percentage, is one supposed to know this Hadoop ecosystem?
So very, very, very valid point. You made an extremely valid point. So it's like if you see Microsoft Office now, to know the entire Microsoft Office suite, including PowerPoint, Excel, and the rest. So the fact is that we may teach everything, but eventually, by the time you start practicing, you may major in that component that you get to use almost all the time, more than the other component that you rarely use. Eventually, I'm go on. Okay, thank you. Okay, so there's an echo. So Smiler just connected, but we are in the same room together. So that's why there's an echo. We are transmitting. This class it's happening from from Abuja. So let me just show you what Smiler look like. So today is Smiler here with me. Smiler, say hi to the guys in Lagos. Okay, so okay, thanks a lot, Osazua. So that question
Yes.
is extremely very valid because as I was saying, I'm certified in Oracle. And there are some components of Oracle. There are some components of our Oracle like Recovery Manager, Aruman. I must confess, I've never had to use it.
Okay.
Once. I've not used it once ever, but I think I had significant training on how to use that Recovery Manager. So so the same way it is for how to. So you would have a general knowledge. So if for those people that are already experts in, I'm disconnected.
No, can hear you. Can hear you.
You can hear me.
Yes.
Hello, can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Can hear you. We can hear you.
Please, can you confirm if you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Hello?
The training will cover all aspects of it, but it's probably a particular aspect of it that you have to work with for your day-to-day activity. It's
Just saying that I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so as I was saying, so for instance, there is a particular component that's called Scoop, for instance. Scoop is used for data migration. You may not necessarily be doing data migration all the time. It's probably maybe once in a while. So if you had to do data migration, say within for a project, for instance, maybe for a 1-year project, it's probably maybe only for 1 month that you ever have to do migrated. So you just need to know that, okay, if I want to do data migration, it's Scoop that I need to get to use. So it's not necessarily like it's every day that you'll be using Scoop to be moving the data. So even if you have forgotten how to use Scoop, there are materials both online and within your training material that can easily reference to know, okay, what command do I need to execute in order to perform this particular operation? So you don't need to know everything, but you need to have that fundamental, the basics. You need to know the basics. So if you know the basics and you understand the fundamentals, you know which component is relevant for whatever operation that you want to perform. I've been doing Oracle since 2002. There are things I want to do today that I'll still call some of my former colleagues and say, okay, Bayo, how do we do this thing? Can you please remind me? So that is also why those are some benefits of attending training like this, so that you can have a professional network that you can always tap into to guide you when you're working on something that you're not very conversant with. Does that answer your question?
It does. Yes, it does.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So is there any other question? I'm ready to take any other question if there's any other question. Okay, so let's proceed. So the file system, the Hadoop file system, it's that location where the data itself is stored, you know. And we started last week by talking about distributed computing. So we said distributed computing, we said there's a job, that job is distributed among a number of computing devices. So the same way, the file. So you have a big data file that you are working on. That file can be distributed across a number of computing resources that is available, or across a number of disk space that's available. So imagine if we do census for Nigeria and we try to collect information on 200 million people that are living in Nigeria. 100 million people, you have their data stored on it. Now, when you store this file on a in the traditional way, if you store if the disk crashes, you lose all the data that is stored or for that population data that you have there. But what Hadoop now will do with that
Hello, sir. Your voice is breaking.
distributing the data is that it wants to guide against failover. I think I'm having a problem with my network. Am I going on and off, or is my network?
Yes. No, you are going on and off.
Okay, so I realized I'm going on and off, and that is why I had to ask that question. Since my network is going on and off, because even my link is showing that it's trying to reconnect.
So you may want to start again with the intro. You're just about to start saying it, so you started breaking.
Okay, so I think I'm back now. I feel the network should be better, but if it's not good, please let me know so that I can adjust whenever I start behaving that way. So I was trying to paint a scenario about the HDFS. So that is the is the exact location. That is the file, or is the exact location where the data itself is stored within the Hadoop framework. And the way it works is that Hadoop HDFS distributes the data across all the different resources that are the Hadoop framework. Remember, it is distributed computing. So you have a number of computers that are connected together within that network. So now you have a big file that you want to work on. So instead of having that file stored on a single disk, for instance, instead of having that file stored on a single disk, that file is distributed across a number of disks, you know. And why he has to do that is that if one of the disks fails, it gets the other disk is going to like take over from where the failed disk stopped, you know. So that's how the HDFS concept itself is designed. It is designed in such a way that it allows users to write the file once, you know, in order to avoid unnecessarily replication of the file on the same disk, or you know, having like multiple version of the same data. I want to be careful because I'm going to say something later on that a little bit contradicts that. In the traditional system, if you write data, you can go and modify that data. But on HDFS, you write once and you can read that data many times. And I'll give you an insight. So if you have your email, for instance, an email that was sent to you like in 2016, you can just go and reference that email and call the data. Another person cannot send an email that will update that email that you have sent. You know, somebody cannot perform another person cannot just go and update that email that you have sent. So even if you have to delete, it just means that email is no longer going to be available. But you cannot update, you cannot add to that email. If you want to update that email, you need to send another email again. Cast your mind back to a bank. So if you have a transaction generated in a bank, for instance, if the teller discovers that he has made a mistake in the bank, the teller does not delete that transaction that he has generated. What the teller will have to do is to post another transaction, you know, that will negate the original transaction that he or she has posted. That is the way Hadoop works. So it works in such a way that you write only once, and you can now reference that data that is written once. You can reference it as multiple times as as possible. HDFS ensures that the data can be read from a cached copy of the files. There's a location where you can easily access that file, without necessarily doing unnecessary copy and paste. And it's designed for high volume data set. So I'll give you another example. You have a video, for instance. That video can be on your PC, right from your computer alone. But if that video is stored on maybe a HDFS platform, what it will mean is that file can be divided into, you can break it down into different components and store it across multiple disks in a way that when you are watching that video, you think that video is just coming from one single system. It's actually coming from multiple systems, because one single system cannot actually load just that file alone. Please feel free to ask me any question if it's not clear. But I think next week we are going to be practicalizing HDFS specifically. So take a look at this.
More clearer.
Yeah, it's going to definitely make it more clearer. So in terms of the architecture of HDFS, there are some components of HDFS, and this is very, very important for those.
Hey, so your voice is breaking again. Oh, why is one calling me? One is calling me. Hello, sir. Your voice is breaking. You said this is very important for those.
It keeps breaking. I can really.
I said that, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So I was saying that it's very, very important for the practitioners to understand the architecture of HDFS. Remember, I said earlier, there are three key components of HDFS. That is of Hadoop, HDFS, Yarn, and MapReduce. And you then ask the question that there are so many things to learn, that what are those things that you should know? Do you need to know all of the components? You just need to know the fundamental component, and that is HDFS, and then MapReduce, and then Yarn. Those are the things you need to master. If you master that, then the other ones, you can know those ones at the surface, and if you need to master those ones, you can always master those ones later on. So in terms of HDFS, this is the architecture. So say you have a server. That server, or you have a cluster. A cluster is a network of different servers, or it's a network of different computers.
That's cut my voice.
I want to be sure if you are hearing me, so that he's disconnected. I'll call someone. Ayola, please, can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Okay, thank you. Dorcas, can you hear me?
Yeah, it keeps breaking. I can't hear you.
Okay. So I need to fix my network. Just a minute. Let me fix my network. I'll take 1 minute to fix the network. I need to solve this network. Okay, so I'll switch to a new network, and I hope that my voice quality is going to improve significantly now. So please, I need you to confirm if you can hear me. Dorcas, you said you could not hear me before. Titi said you could not hear me well. Do I sound a lot better now, or I still have issue with my voice quality?
I think it's okay for now. I just hope it doesn't start breaking again.
Okay, so I'm connected to a different network now, so I believe it should be a lot better now. I'll just go back one slide, then I'll move forward. So we said HDFS is the component of Hadoop where the file is stored. It's a logical location, not necessarily the physical location, but it's a logical location where the file is stored, and it makes the file to be stored in a very efficient way, in such a way that you can read it and you can easily read the file whenever you need to have access to the file. And I said that the way it works is that you can, with the way HDFS is designed, you can write once and you can read multiple times. So you look at an example. If somebody send you, if somebody upload a picture online, for instance, now if you upload a picture online, you write to that location once. So many people can always go and reference that picture that you have posted online. So if I post a picture on Instagram, some people can go there and view the picture I posted on Instagram. That is like at the back end of Instagram is an architecture that is like Hadoop architecture or HDFS architecture. In the bank, one way you can reference that in the bank is that you generate a transaction in the bank. That transaction is always stored there. So anytime you maybe 2 years later, you want to ask for your transaction history from the bank, you're always going to find it logged in there. So HDFS is going to be a solid component in order to be able to track or to store banking transaction, because banking transaction is like a read, it's a write once, read as multiple times as possible. Now, the next thing I want to do is to move into talk about the architecture of HDFS. And when we talk about the architecture, we talk about what are the different components that make up HDFS, or how are they structured? How do they communicate to each other? At the core of HDFS are two elements that they call the data node and the name node. Please take note of that. This is definitely going to come out in your exam. If you are going to be writing the exam, there it's the data node and the name node. And then the combination of these two make up what is called like a commodity server, and then a number of servers make up what is called a cluster. And the way it works is that the relationship between name node and data node is a master-slave relationship. So I'll take time to explain what exactly does name node, what it does. So the name node is like a directory. It's like a directory that holds information about all the data nodes and the information that is stored on the data nodes. While the data node is that location, is that logical location where the data itself is stored. Please, can I say that again, or that is clear? Okay, I should say it again. Okay.
Yes, please.
Say that again.
I said you can say it again, please.
Okay. So now let me start with the name node. The name node is like a directory that holds information on the resources that are available on HDFS and the data that is stored on those resources. While the data node is that logical location where the data is stored. So let me relate it to something that you know. 1,000 people are traveling to Abuja, and we have said that, okay, we are going to put them in 200 cars because that is like our distributed file system. So we want to distribute that data, 1,000 people, into 200 vehicles. But at any point in time, we need to be able to tell out of those 1,000 people, in which vehicle can you find them? So which means that we need to have a manifest. So that manifest would have people's name, and it will have car information about a car, and it will tell in which car it's a particular person, you know, so there's a manifest. The name node serve as a manifest, while the data node, it's like the car itself. It's like the car that a passenger among the 1,000 people it's occupying at a particular point in time. So if you want to know where it's Blessing Oladeji, you don't need to start searching all the vehicle. You don't need to start scanning all the vehicle from vehicle number 1 to vehicle number 200. You can just query the manifest. By the time you query the manifest is going to tell you where you find the Blessing, and you just quickly go to that, navigate to the location where you find Blessing. So name node, it's like holds that information, holds that directory on where the data is stored. Why data node is the location where the data is stored. That is, I think that explains it. Now, you can have a number of data nodes within a particular server. And when we say a server, we are talking about a computer. So you can have a number of data nodes within a particular server, and then a number of servers within a cluster. So if 10 of us have 10 computers, we can connect our 10 computers together within a cluster, and that is like a cluster of computer. Now, on each computer, there can be multiple data nodes. Yes, there can be multiple data nodes, which is that location where data itself is stored. And then there is a name node, which is like that directory that holds information about where the data is stored on the data node that is on the 10 servers that is within the cluster. Titi, I want to get a feedback from you because you've been quiet. Ayola, I also want a feedback from you because you've been quiet.
Sorry, Blessing, did you just call my name?
Yes.
Okay, I'm with you. You're talking about the components of the HDFS and the data node and the name node. That the name node is the directory where the directory that holds the location where information is stored, basically, and then the data node is the logical location where the data itself is stored.
Thank you. You got it. Okay, so that simply explains it. So the HDFS works by breaking a large file into smaller pieces. Name node, it's that directory where the information that holds information about where the data is stored, why the data node is that exact logical location where the data is stored. So what it means is that if name node is not available, then it will be difficult to access the data because it holds the information about where you can find the data. So it will be difficult to access the data if name node is not available. So name node is seen as the master, while the data node is like the slave, you know. So name node and data node, they constantly interact because it's also possible that at some point a data node may go down. If a data node, if the communication between the name node and data node, if it breaks, immediately the name node will need to update its database to show that a particular name is no longer available. So there's a master relationship between them, and there's a lot of communication between the name node and the data node. And each time a data set is written to a name node, is written to a data node, the name node is also updated accordingly. So name node is like a traffic police that guides the data. Okay, this is where the data should be written to. There's enough space on this particular data node. Go and write the data to this particular data node. You are looking for a particular information. This is where you are going to find that information. It is name node that guides all of that. It also guides reading of the data, the writing of the data, the replication of the data, the deletion of the data. If you want to delete a data, it guides the deletion of the data. And it guides, more importantly, the replication of the data. And let me talk about that replication of data. So if you have a particular data set, for instance, we said the data set is written on a data node, and the name node has that information. But it's also replicated on another data node. It's also replicated on another data node. You know, so you have a piece of data. Here it's a data node. Here's another data node. The name node says, okay, write this piece of information on this data node that is here. But at the same time, that data is also replicated on another data node somewhere else on another server somewhere. And why is that? Why that is done is that in case this commodity server is no longer available, you will not lose the data because there is a replica of that data on this particular server. So the name node holds information on the server, holds information on the data, holds information on the data node, and also guides the replication of the data within the network. So you can imagine that there's a whole lot of coordination that will be happening within the system. There's a whole lot that will be happening within the system. So let's look at data node. So data node provides heartbeat information. There's what is called heartbeat information, and that is that communication between the data node and the name node. It's very, very important. If the heartbeat is no longer available, what it means is that that data node is not available at that particular point in time, you know. And it's possible that a data node is not available. Maybe you want to shut down the server for maintenance purpose. But even though the data node is not available and the data on it is not accessible, remember there's a replica of that data on some other server somewhere within the cluster. So because of that, it's going to the system is still going to be functional and the data will still be available because there's a mirror of it. So essentially that's it on data node. So there are some key features that make HDFS work properly. You know, there are some key features that make data node work properly, or HDFS work properly. And when the data is divided into different components, how does the application, if an application is accessing the data, for instance, so how would the application now know that this data that is here and another one that is there is the same data set? So there is transaction log. So the HDFS keeps transaction log of all the data that you are writing. So each time you write a data, each time you delete a data, each time you replicate a data, each time you user access a data, there's a log of all of those operations that is tracked somewhere. So with that audit trail, you can tell what is happening at a particular point in time. There's also checksum that is used to verify all the files. So if you divide the file into different components, it is checksum that used to check that the file is not corrupt and it's a component of the original file. Then there are data blocks. So data blocks is like the minutest component of a data node, you know. So if I draw a diagram now, okay, let me go back one more. Let me go back like one more slide. Yeah, I'll go back one more slide. So here you have data node. So this data node itself is divided into data blocks. A data node itself is divided into data blocks. So it will make it possible to be able to reference, okay, this is of that data block. So for this piece of data, this is the starting point on it, and this is the ending point on it. This is core computer science. I'm not going to go into all of that so that I don't confuse you more. But I think you have gotten some of the gist. There is data pipeline that supports movement of data across servers. So if data is moving from one server within the cluster to another server, It's data pipeline that facilitates those kind of data movement across servers within a particular cluster. Yeah, so some of the function of data block, as I said, is so data block helps you to store data in a particular location. The data block will have an address, and that address is updated on the name node. So each time you are looking for a piece of data on the data node, it is the address of the data block that is actually written or referenced on the name node. If I draw this thing on a board, you are going to probably enjoy it a lot. You are going to enjoy it a lot more. The data block stores the metadata of a block within a file system, and it does periodic validation. It tries to check if the data is valid or if the data has been corrupted. And it sends regular reports to name node. Remember, name node is that dictionary that holds that updates the address of the data itself. So if the address is changing, it means that the data block where the data is stored on the data node has changed. So there must be that communication. So regularly there's communication between the data block and the name node. It supports direct access to data node from client applications. So when an application wants to access the data node, it supports it. And yeah, so essentially those are some of the functions of a data block. Next week we are going to be practicalizing this, so I hope you will find it a lot more interesting next week. You definitely have a lot more questions to ask. Just prepare for it. Now a few things happen within HDFS, and one of those things that happen is that HDFS keeps a replica of every block. So when we say a replica, you have a data set, you want to copy the population of everybody in Nigeria, 200 million people, for instance. Those 200 million people, you are storing it maybe across, okay, so those 200 million people, let's divide them into 26 servers, for instance, or let's divide them into 26 data blocks. So people that their name starts with A will go to a different data node. People that their name starts with B will go to a different data node. People that their name starts with C will go to a different data node. From A to Z, so 26, you understand, on a different data node. But what that will mean is that if a particular data node crashes, all of the data for that alphabet that data node represents will be lost. So in order to safeguard against that single point of failure, SPOF, in order to guard against that SPOF, what is done is that data is replicated. So if you have A on data node number 1, you still have it replicated on another data node somewhere, just in case if the data node number 1 fails, you don't lose the data that is stored on A. So that is the way it works. So it keeps a replica of every block locally, and it places a second replica on a different rack to guard against complete failure. Then it sends a third replica again. So depending on how you design it, there could be multiple. You can have up to 3 or 4 or 5 different replicas. So that is why you can see that how come that Google has never failed, that people have never said that they've lost their data on Google before. It's because there are multiple replicas of that data set within the Google platform. So okay, this diagram will explain this. So if you look at this diagram, so here it's a data node. This is a data node in a server. This is another data node in the same server. And this is another data node on a different server. So you have a piece of data. A version of that data is stored on this particular data node. another replica of it is stored on this particular data node. So in case this data node fails, this one is going to like serve as a failover for it. Then in case this server, then another replica of it is going to be on another server somewhere else, you know. So if this server, if the whole of this server fails, for instance, if the whole of this server fails, because you have a copy or a replica of it in this particular server, you can still access it. Then there's what they call rack. A rack can fail. So a rack is like a system that is holding multiple servers. So if the power that goes into that rack, if it fails, if a version is stored on another rack somewhere, it means that you can still, at least to a large extent, recover the data. And that is how cloud computing also works. That is why cloud computing can be significantly reliable, because there are so many replica of the data. So then he sent another replica to a random location somewhere, maybe on the local system or a remote system. So by default, you can say that there are like how many clusters? There are many replicas. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are like 4 different. You can have multiple depending on how much your organization is ready to invest into big data. You understand? You know, you can have multiple replica, but at the minimum, you can have up to 4 different replica of the data within your organization. So the chance of failure is significantly reduced. Okay, so before now, HDFS did not have all those kind of advantages. Please, is my voice coming out well, or I'm going on and off? I need to get that feedback.
It's coming out well.
Thank you. Okay, so originally, this advantage that we just spoke about the elimination of a single source of failure was not in Hadoop 1.0, the first version of Hadoop, the one that the Yahoo guys that they designed. It was not so originally, you know. It was in the version 2 that the second version that they eventually designed. They eventually designed it in order to be able to can you hear me? Okay, so it was in the second version that they eliminated that single point of failure. And if the name node is not active, the cluster will not be accessible. Of course, that is very intuitive. You can understand that, because if, let's go back there it's a name node, which is the directory, or which is the manifest that has information on all the disk that is available, or all the data blocks that is available, and the data node that is available, and the server that is available, and the cluster that is available. Name node coordinate all of that. So it means that if this name node goes down, it means everything is lost, because we don't have information about anything. You know, even the replica, we don't know where it is. So what it now does is that there is also a duplication of this particular name node across other servers in order to be able to guard against single point of failure. So so to guarantee high availability, we've talked about replication of data. There's replication of data across the data nodes, and also the name node is also replicated in order to be able to guarantee availability. Yeah. So essentially, that's how HDFS works. I'll be glad to take your question before we move to MapReduce. Okay, so I'll take a 1-minute break so that you can assimilate everything that I've said. Then, yes, so that I can assimilate everything that I've said. Then we'll continue. 1 minute break. Okay, so I'm back. So we've talked about HDFS. HDFS is where that data itself is stored within the Hadoop ecosystem. Next is MapReduce, and MapReduce is like an algorithm. It's not really like a software per se. It's just like an implementation or an algorithm that guides how the data is broken down and recombined, all together. So it's an implementation that is developed into the Hadoop framework. And for those that know what they call divide and conquer, it adopts the concept of divide and conquer. And how it does it is that if there is a data set that is submitted to a Hadoop framework, what it does is that it will break it down into different components and then distribute it to the computing resources that need it. And when the operation is completed, it combines all of that resource and then present your answer. So I'll give you an instance. So we want to count. So we did a population census of 200 million people in Nigeria. They want to know how many people their name is just a simple example. This is just a very simple example. How many people have their name starting with A? How many people have their name starting with B to C to D to E, for instance? You understand? So you can get in the traditional way. You might have a computer that will scan through the whole 200 million database and is counting one file at a time. For A and for B and for C and for D until it gets to Z. But the way MapReduce is going to implement that is that it will take the whole 200 million people and split them. It could split them into 26 different jobs. It will split them to 26 different jobs. And then each job will not, maybe based on the alphabet, you split them to 26 different jobs based on the alphabet. After doing the splitting, then there is going to be a task of counting all the members of that alphabet, or all the population that is within a particular alphabet. And then after it does the counting, then it returns the result. So for A, it will tell you that this is the number of person. For B, this is the number of person. So it split the job into 26 different tasks. So it does not necessarily have to be one single node or one single computing resource that will be doing all the counting, but 26 different resources can do all of the counting. And that is why we said that distributed computing, a task is distributed among the computing resources. So that is the implementation of MapReduce. So the process will start with a user request to run a MapReduce program. And that continues until the result is written back into HDFS. It's like a tool for businesses to handle both structured and unstructured data. I'll give you one application. of MapReduce that we had recently. So So in the banks, there is, let me see, am I connected? Because in sometimes I may be disconnected. How many people are in the class? 6 people. Okay. So that means I'm still connected. So in the banks, that if you have worked in the bank before, on the core banking system, when you generate a transaction on your mobile application or on internet banking, what happens is that you leave a transaction narration. So that transaction narration will give an idea of the kind of transaction that you perform. So maybe it's you transfer money to Blessing now and you say loan, or that means you borrowed money from Blessing, you are returning back the money. So transaction narration is loan, or say it's DSTV. After you did your transaction, you just say DSTV, you just wrote it that way there. Now, to a large extent, that particular feed that holds information on transaction narration in the bank, it's significantly unstructured. So another person can write cable TV while somebody else will write DSTV, and they mean exactly the same thing. So because it's unstructured, if you want to scan through that data set, it takes a very long time. If you are running the traditional SQL sentence, for those that know how to run SQL sentence, if you want to use Excel to analyze that data, it's almost impossible to use Excel to be able to analyze those type of data because it's not structured, and Excel is very conversant with structured data. So if you want to say test to feed, there's a component in Excel that they call test to feed, where all the tests that are within that narration, you want to combine them into different feed. Then you now want to start analyzing it. It could take a very, very long time to even do it, or almost impossible to do it with Excel. Now, the other option you may have is that, okay, you want to use SQL to run it. If you run it on SQL, it will also run, but it could take a very long time to run, and you have to do a lot of manipulation and processing to get it done. But on if MapReduce does it, so I've implemented this on MapReduce before, and it ran in less than 2 seconds. Like in less than 2 seconds, the result was out. So what we did was that we passed all of those transaction narration for 1 year. We passed it into a MapReduce program. And then we said, can you show us the most frequently occurring transaction narration? So that will give us an idea of what people are spending money on the most in this particular bank. So with that, the bank can now go and design a product or come up with a proposition for people that do that particular type of transaction, you know. So MapReduce got it done significantly faster than how other tools can get it done. And it's the fact that it uses that concept of take the task, we broke it down into smaller components and counted each of the components and then combined the results all together again. So how it works, there are 2 components in MapReduce. There is a map component and there is a reduce component. It is the map component that divides the job into that breaks the data into smaller components. And then it will now pass it into the program that will run the job. Once the job is completed, it is the reduce component that combines all the results together into the final output that you are looking for. So in this diagram, so how to read this diagram is, so you have an input. You have an input coming in here. You have an input job. So that's a job that is coming into this program, into this MapReduce program, or into this HDFS program. It's coming like a HDFS file, you know, like a file from HDFS. So as a job is imputed, or the data is imputed into the system, MapReduce, the map component of MapReduce will split it into smaller components. It will split it into smaller components. So map is what splits it. After splitting the job, then it will sort the job. After splitting the job, it executes the job. After executing the job, it sorts the result. After sorting the result, Then the reduce component will now combine all of that result and create an output, and the output is passed back into to you as the user. So it's just as simple as that. It's like a code that's actually running. It's not like a software. It's like a piece of code that they run. MapReduce is not very flexible because each time you have a different kind of job, you might need to write a different kind of code that will execute that MapReduce job. So it's not very flexible. It's not very flexible. So this is a logical flow of how MapReduce works. So you have like a 20 terabytes of data, and you have a 20 terabytes of data, and that 20 terabytes of data is passed on to a MapReduce server node. So what MapReduce does is that it distributes the 20 terabytes into 20 different nodes. So you would need to imagine a cluster or a network that has 20 different computers in it. For instance, imagine a network that has 20 different computers in it. So there is now a big job, a 20 terabytes. 20 terabytes is very, very big. It's bigger than, it's like times 20 of my hard disk size. The hard disk of my computer is 1 terabyte. So a 20 terabyte job, it's like a whole lot, it's a whole lot of data. So for me to be able to analyze that data or to perform some job on that data, so the first thing to do is to split that job into 20 different nodes. So that is about maybe 500, 20 nodes, that is about 1 terabyte each, that is like 1 terabyte each. So there's a 1 terabyte copy. Then there is a MapReduce program that is applied on that data. So what the MapReduce program will do is that the map component will split it into smaller job, and then it passes it into the program that runs the job. After running the job, the reduce component combines everything from all the 20 different servers. It combines it together again, and then present the result to the user who submitted the program. So that's how it's all. But again, you don't need to have 20 terabytes for you to be able to test how MapReduce works. You can test it on a smaller bit of data. You can test it, and we are going to test that next week. Yeah, we should be able to test it next week. So compared to relational database, I gave that example with the bank example I gave. Compared to relational database, MapReduce can handle some issues better than relational database system, and that is the bank example that I gave to you. If you want to query transaction narrations for maybe a GT Bank has about 10 million customers, and those 10 million customers, they generate transaction every day. Maybe in a day they generate about maybe 30 million transactions in a day. 10 million people, they generate just 3 transactions in a day. That is about 30 million transactions on average. Now calculate all of that in a month, then in a year. Now you want to analyze the transaction narration, and why you want to do that is so that you can know what products do you want to create for 2021 based on all the transaction type that they have generated this year. The way SQL will analyze it, SQL will probably take like a long time to analyze it, while MapReduce can analyze it a lot faster. So some of those tasks that MapReduce would do better than relational database system would be passing of tests, crunching of web logs, and reading of a huge raw data source. Yeah, so MapReduce is at its best when most of the data is from a large set of inputs. When most of the data from a large set of inputs is not required for analysis. So But what that it's saying is that most of the time, MapReduce does not analyze all of the data. It only analyzes a particular component of that data set. Not necessarily all the part of data is what it analyzes. And MapReduce also can sort the data, irrespective of the size of that data. MapReduce can sort it. There are some sorting algorithm that is working behind the scene in MapReduce, like quick sort, bubble sort, insertion sort, that are used to sort the data a lot faster. That is why the job can easily be combined after the result is obtained. MapReduce is like, it works like what they call ETL. It extracts the data, transform the data, and then return the result back to you. That is how MapReduce works. ETL is extract, transform, and load. Extract the data, transform the data, and then represent the data somewhere else. So I'll show you. So here is the data. Here is the data that is coming from ADFS. It comes in here. It's extracting the data into the system. Then this partitioner is transforming that data. That means it's performing some operation on the data. After performing that operation on the data, then it sorts the results and then combine the results together. So that combination, and then return it as an output. That returning it is like the loading part of the ETL job. It's something that you will definitely encounter as a data scientist. You always encounter somebody giving you some file. You have to load it into somewhere. You have to process it and then return the result in a particular way. Something that you always encounter, whether as a data scientist or a data engineer or a data analyst. It's always there. In fact, you spend a lot of time manipulating data, getting to work with those type of data. That is where you spend most of your time. However, MapReduce has some weaknesses. It's not a database, you know. MapReduce is not a database, so MapReduce does not store data. You know, it does not store data. It just operates on data and then returns the result back to HDFS. It collects data from HDFS, perform operation on it, and returns it back. It does not store the data, so it does not have all the flexibility, security, all the razzmatazz that comes with a traditional database system. It does not have all of that. It does not have things like indexing. It does not have things like security. You know, it does not have all of that. MapReduce sees every job as an entity. It's not aware of other operations that may be going on that data set. So if you submit a job to MapReduce program, it just sees that job. It's not aware of other things it needs to know about that data set. It's a relatively new concept, and not a lot of people know how to configure it or how to code it. And it can be cumbersome to code. It can be cumbersome at times to code if you don't really grab the concept very well, you know. Okay. Any question before I proceed? Any question? Smiler, any question? We are here together. So do you have any question for me? Okay. Okay. Okay, so Dorcas, do you have any question? Dorcas is not. Ayola, do you have any question? Any feedback, comments? Oyinlola, feedbacks, comments? I'd like to have your feedback or your comments.
No questions yet.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you. You know, those feedback make me feel that I'm not doing it. Actually, I'm not doing it. Yeah. Okay, so the top component of the Hadoop framework that you need to master is the YARN. YARN is called yet another resource negotiator. So it's like as the name connotes, it's a resource negotiator, you know, because we've been able to establish that the kind of operation that happen on HDFS and the kind of operation that happen on MapReduce will be resource intensive, you know. So we talked about 20 clusters. We just give an example of 20 clusters, for instance. If you have to manage 20 clusters, and on those 20 clusters, imagine that maybe there are maybe 40 name nodes. Maybe there are 40 data nodes. Yeah, maybe there are 40 data nodes. Maybe there are more than 1,000 data blocks, you know, and maybe there are just 2 name nodes, for instance. Those are the resources that need to be managed. Somebody needs to know which resources are available at a particular point in time, which one is currently occupied. For the one that is occupied, to what extent is it occupied? Is it ready to take additional data? Or whichever way, whatever it is, somebody needs to be doing all of those tracking. So that is the job of Yan. Yan handles all of that. He's a resource manager and he's also an application manager. He manages resources, it also manages application. So you can tell application what resources that it can have access to and what resources it cannot have access to. You know, when a resource is no longer occupied, he releases it for an application to make use of. So Yan is a resource manager and application manager. Let's see a little bit of how it works. So there are like 3 key components that Yan manages at any point in time. Number 1, it manages CPU. That is a processor. It manages, that is processor and memory put together. Let me put it that way. So CPU is processor and memory put together. Then it manages disk, and it also manages network, because those are the components that facilitate all the kind of coordination that you have within the Hadoop ecosystem. So what happens is that each node has a node manager that is saved to the global resource manager in the cluster. So for a node, there's a node manager. Let's go back to this diagram. So if you come back to this diagram, no, not in this slide. It's in the other slide. So in that diagram that has the architecture of in the diagram that has the architecture of HDFS, there are nodes, there are data nodes, and there are data blocks. So all of those nodes, they have a resource manager that is coordinating the data blocks that they need, the data node that is there, and if there's a name node that is there, it also manages all of that at any point in time. And what it tries to track is that, is this particular name node or is this particular data node, is it currently in operation? Is it currently occupied? To what extent is it occupied? Is it available to take another? Does it have enough space to take another data that is about to be executed now? Those are some of the decisions that it tries to make. So the resource manager component of Yan, it's like a master service and a control manager for 2 components. One of them is the node manager in each of the node of the Hadoop, and all the required system information is stored within what is called a resource container. So all the information that is required in Yan is stored within something that is called resource container. So resource container has information about every available information or every available resource. I'll take that again. So Yan has resource manager and application manager. Then resource manager has what is called resource container. So it's the resource container that has that database of all the resources that are available. And then resource manager also has node manager. So it has node manager and it has resource manager. Node manager manages all the nodes that are available. Resource container has information about all the resources that are available, you know. So if a job is submitted and more resources are required, it is the node manager that will go and look for that resources based on the information that is available in the node manager. So that's how it works. The node manager would monitor things like the CPU usage, the disk usage, the memory usage within it at any point in time. So if you go to your computer taskbar at a particular, if you go to your computer, if you open Task Manager, for instance, you will see Task Manager will show you where is it? I'll share. I want to share my screen differently. Disconnect and connect. Where is it? Desktop. Okay. So here is my computer. You can see my computer. My computer has CPU usage history. It has physical memory usage history. There is another one that has disk usage. Okay. But it has CPU usage and memory usage. Maybe it does not have disk usage. There's a resource monitor. There's a resource monitor here that manages all the resources that my computer is using at any particular point in time. So you can see some of the resources are CPU, memory, and disk and network. You understand? For my own physical computer. But the same way in Hadoop, in Hadoop, when you submit a job, the job is going to require CPU, the job is going to require memory, it's going to require disk, it's also going to require network. So it is the resource manager. It is the resource manager that manages all of these components for the Hadoop system. You understand? So computers have it. So it's just like an operating system stuff. Can I continue?
Yes, you can.
Okay, thanks. So node manager also negotiate at some point. So if a job is running and that job is running for too long and another job presents itself that has a higher priority or that has a higher urgency, a node manager can negotiate for resource, you know, and ask a job that is currently in execution to pause so that another job will quickly be executed and then the resource will be made available to the one that was paused. But the fact that it happens very fast, it happens like within the split of a second, in such a way that a user may not necessarily know what is happening behind the scene. Okay, so I think that is the end of Yarn. So we've talked about Yarn, we've talked about MapReduce, we've talked about HDFS. Okay, and then we said that there are other components of the Hadoop framework. There are other components of the Hadoop framework apart from the core component. This core component is good you understand them at any point in time. If you understand them, you know how to manipulate them to get your job done and to get your job done very well. But beyond them, there are some other components of the Hadoop ecosystem that we're also going to be looking at. One of them is HBase. There is HBase, there is Hive, there is Scoop. They have different functions that they perform. So let's take a look at HBase. But please, if you have any question on MapReduce, Yarn, please ask me before we switch into HBase, because HBase is another topic on its own. Will help us get more questions. Sure. Yes. Of course. So next week will be dedicated purely to the practical. Will be dedicated to the practical sessions. Okay. So let me start by explaining what a database is. So a database is like an application where data can be stored. It's an application where data can be stored. And an example of a database is your Excel. Excel is a spreadsheet, actually, but it's like a database because you can take people's information, their first name, their last name, their date of birth, their address, and you store it inside the Excel sheet. And you can keep adding to the bottom. You can go and update and delete and do whatsoever you have to do. So within Hadoop framework too, it's a component that behaves like a database. It behaves like a database. And that component is called HBase. There's another one that's also called Hive. Hive is usually meant for structured data sets. Hive also has even its own query language, has a set of commands that you can run to access the data that is in it, to retrieve the data that is in it, to write data to it, and so on. But HBase is what they call columnar database, and enables data to be stored with rows and columns in a way that is similar to the way you have it in Excel or the way you have it in relational database. The intersection between a row in HBase and a column in HBase is called a cell. And that is also the same way it is in Excel. In Excel, the intersection between a row and a column is called a Excel. The implementation of HBase is very scalable. It is very scalable. And it helps you to store data, and then you can also retrieve data that you store within it. If you want to update a data set that is stored in HBase, what you do is to create another version of that data, because it's a write once, read multiple time kind of platform. So if it's a write one, read multiple time kind of platform, all you just need to do is to create another version of that data without necessarily manipulating or deleting what you have already written in there. And I can give an example. You send an email. If you send an email to someone, you now realize that you have made a mistake. You want to send another email. What happens is that if you are sending from, let's say, Gmail to Yahoo Mail, for instance, what happens is that if you want to recall an email you have sent before, if it's going from one mail application to another mail application, it simply does not have control. It will just create another version of that same email that you have sent before, and to just notify the user that the one that you called before has been recalled. So HBase is designed for those type of scenario where you have to write once and read multiple times. So yeah, next week we just have to do practical, because at least there is so much story that we've been talking about. There's just so much story, so it would be great to also practicalize all of this stuff. So the hands-on practice, it's always drive. It helps to instill the knowledge a lot better. So next week we'll be having practical. Friday, Saturday we'll be having practical on this. So please, I would like you to prepare for that practical session. So HBase, the data in HBase is consistent. Data in HBase is consistent. Each time you read to it or you write to it, the data is always very consistent, which means that you can always retrieve data in a very high speed. That does not necessarily need to. That does not require all those RDA-PMS features. You don't need to write a lot of query in order for you to retrieve your data. It also has a functionality that is called sharding. Sharding, it's called like automatically splitting data and redistributing it within the infrastructure that is available. So if you store data on a relational database system, that data is stored, is just going to be there. But what HBase does is that HBase can redistribute data. It can split a data set and then redistribute it. So if your file size start getting bigger and bigger to some point, HBase can split that data automatically without you even knowing it, and then redistribute it to other file systems within the Hadoop framework. High availability, and that guarantees high availability, failover, and recovery, because there is replication of data. So it's also inherit all the properties, all the good features of HDFS file system, inherit all of those features. So failover, recovery of data, because there is replication of data within the system. And then you can also write an API. You can do an API call into a HBase database. So you just want people to call the data that is in HBase. You can build an API that will do that. Okay. So API is an acronym for Application Programming Interface. So there are many ways you can move data around. One way you can move data around, you can just go and download that data. You can go and download that data from somewhere. Another way you can move data around is you can do what they call ETL, extract the data, transform the data, and load the data somewhere else. Then the other way you can also move data around is through APIs. You can build APIs to move data around. So how APIs work is that, you write a program and you create a format in which you write a program, for instance, and in that program, you create a format in which data can be exchanged between your own system and another system. So let's say, for instance, you are into agribusiness and you want to be collecting information from Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, for instance. You can write an API that will go to Nigerian Bureau of Statistics website, collect the data from that website, and write it into your agribusiness website. Another way, it might also be the other way around, in such a way that you are the one that is posting data to Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. So you can design an API that will also take data from your own end and use some standard format and send it to Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. So maybe your application tracks something like maybe exchange rate on a daily basis, and you don't want somebody to manually go to that website, be collecting the exchange rate and be manually writing it. So you can write an API that will go to a website in a particular day. It will check the exchange rate for that particular day. It will collect it and store it in a database. So that is how API works. So HBase facilitates that. So HBase, you can write an API that pulls data into HBase or that gets data from HBase. Thank you. Okay, so another component of Hadoop. This is the fifth component of Hadoop we'll be talking about today. This one is called Hive. Hive is like your traditional SQL environment. It's like it's like your traditional SQL environment. It's built for data warehousing. So if you have some companies have a lot of data and they want to warehouse all of that data, Hive is a batch-oriented data warehousing layer that is built on top of the Hadoop and on top of the Hadoop HDFS and MapReduce file system. It works like SQL. It has a simple SQL command or some set of SQL command that you can run against it. Hadoop, Hive has table, has partitions, has buckets. Table is like what you have in Excel sheets, where the data is stored. You can now partition those tables so that you can guarantee easy access. And within a table, you can even have buckets of data, so it's like a sub-partition. It's like a sub-partition. So with a table, you can partition a table and a partition, you can break it down into bucket. And when we talk about partition, there was, so I used to work in Etisalat. In 2014, I used to work in Etisalat. So at times they will tell us, okay, we need to do some analysis. That analysis will be on a table that has maybe more than 500 million rows. So if you want to query 500 million rows, at times you just click that command. You just go to the canteen, go and eat, and come back to check the result. And then you go and gist with your friend, and then come back to come and check the result. So it was taking a very long time for queries to run. Then we implemented the concept of partition. So you can partition that data on a daily basis in such a way that instead of having 500 million records, querying them at the same time, and what you are looking for is the people that perform a particular transaction in a particular day. So instead of searching through the whole database of 500 million records, you can just search that particular partition for the day that holds the record that you are looking for. In that case, instead of, you can imagine searching through 500 million records and searching through 20 million records. Which one will be faster? Of course, it's 20 million records that will be faster. So partition reduces the search area for that data, you know, and then bucket now also limits again the scope of what you can search for within that data set. So it's like creating division within a large data set. Hive supports all of this functionality, you know, and the next component. Okay, so this is like a knowledge check. Which of the following components of Hadoop provide SQL-like access to structured data and sophisticated big data analysis? Okay, so I want to twist this question. So I'm asking a question now, and someone is going to answer this question for me. Maybe Ayola. Ayola, which of the following components that I'm going to list out have the SQL-like access to structured data in Microsoft Office? Number 1, PowerPoint. Number 2, Excel. Number 3, Microsoft Word. And number 4, Microsoft Access. Which one is the answer?
Can you come again, please? It's break.
Okay. So the question is that
Number 1.
No. This is not the question. Listen to the question. Are you there?
Can you come again, please? It's breaking.
Okay,
I'm here.
Okay, now this is the question. Which of the following components of Microsoft Office will provide SQL-like access to structured data? Number 1, PowerPoint. Number 2, Microsoft Word. Number 3, Microsoft Excel. Number 4, Microsoft Access.
Excel.
Have you seen Microsoft Access before?
Excel.
Have you seen Microsoft Access before?
Hello, sir.
Have you seen Microsoft Access before?
I can't hear you.
Okay, so the answer is not
Excuse me.
It's not Excel. The answer is not Excel. The answer is Microsoft Access.
I can't hear.
Wow. Okay, so is there anyone that can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
You can hear me. Okay, so okay, so the answer to the question that I asked, is actually Microsoft Access. A lot of people have not come in contact with Microsoft Access before, but Microsoft Access is that component of Microsoft Office that is SQL-like. It also has its own SQL syntax and SQL commands. So you can also write SQL within it. So all of this framework, the way you have Hadoop is a framework, Microsoft Office is a framework. Even Google is creating its own Google Sheet, Google spreadsheet, different components, within the same application suite. So the Microsoft replica for Hive, is called Microsoft Access. It's called Microsoft Access. So the answer to the question I asked Ayola is actually Hive. Is Microsoft Access, not Excel. Okay, so there are other tools for interacting with Hadoop, and maybe next week we are not going to be talking about this, but after next week we are going to be talking about this. Next week we'll be focusing purely on the practical session. But there are other tools for interacting with Hadoop. You have the Pig, you have the Scoop, you have Zookeeper, you have Flume and Ozy. You can read them up against next week, but they are just very simple components. They just have a particular special thing that they do. The same way you have in Microsoft Office Suite. In Microsoft Office Suite, there are some components that we rarely use. I'm checking my Microsoft Office Suite. Yes. So under Microsoft Office, yes, Microsoft Office, there are some tools. There is Database Compare. I rarely use it. There is Spreadsheet Compare. I rarely use it. In fact, I've not even used it before. There is InfoPath Designer. I've never used it before. There is Microsoft Visio. I use it once in a while. I use it once in a while, and they are part of the Microsoft Office suite. The same way, there are other components for interacting with Hadoop. But next week, the focus next week is going to be practicals. We are going to be practicalizing all of this, and I hope you will enjoy the session next week. Thank you for coming. I'm on standby. If you have any question, please feel free to ask me.
So,
say that again.
So
I didn't hear that.
I said, when are you back?
I'll be back on Friday. I'll be back Friday morning. Yeah. If we traveled on Wednesday.
Said?
I traveled on Wednesday.
Okay.
Or if you go to the office, are you in the office now or you are at home? Okay, if you're in the office, there is someone to support you. If you want to copy the virtual lab environment to your PC, there's someone there right now. But I think he's having another class at the moment now. So except if you be there early before 12 o'clock, then you'll be able to support you. But his class is starting by 2 p.m. So he probably must have started by now.
Apart from filling the virtual, installing the virtual class in my laptop, that discussion we were supposed to have.
Wait, sorry. We cannot have that one. This session is.
Yes.
We'll have a call after this class. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. See you again next week, Friday. Bye.
Bye, thank you.